introduction. I can't wait to go tell Dad that I met you tonight. And thank you all. Thank you to the Greenville Public Library. Thank you to Chautauqua for this opportunity. I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to essentially be your warm-up act for when Steve Jobs comes as a performer to Chautauqua Festival this summer. So make sure you, hopefully I'll get you excited for that too, and make sure that you go to that event. I'm going to get into this throughout my talk. I have subtitled it The Reality Distortion Field. I'm going to explain exactly what that is as we go along, but I'm going to start by telling you that I might be in the reality distortion field myself by thinking I can cover this amazing story in the time that I have allotted. So let's get right to it. And I look forward to maybe raising up a number of different questions that you can ask. Get to the discussion period now. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of Steve Jobs, who is the most creative and greatest entrepreneur and innovator of our time. His biographer, Walter Isaacson, has said that has asserted that he will be remembered in 100 years from now, and that he will join the pantheon of the greatest innovators. That includes the electric light, the Model T, and a number of different things that we're going to talk about from this fellow tonight. In addition to that, none of the other things they have in common, none of the three of them invented those things. Okay, they were innovators. They built upon the creations of others, which is one of the key lessons for tonight. And how to innovate is to see what's out there and then apply it, stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, apply it to a new field, to a new area, in a way that is what people need, or what people need and don't even know that they need it. Now, there's a third thing that these three have in common. These three were all in various ways deeply, deeply flawed, which is another one of the themes, or another one of the lessons that we have to discuss tonight. Thomas Edison. I'm not going to go into all the details, but Thomas Edison, look up Thomas Edison and the invention of the electric chair. Look up Henry Ford and the Nazis. Okay? Not cool, Henry. Not cool at all. Steve Jobs, we're going to talk about he had a very, very bullying personality. He could be at times a pathological liar in order to get what he wanted. He did truly terrible, despicable things to some of the people who were closest to him, and we'll talk about some of those here. But in all of these cases, the greatness was able to surpass the flaws. Steve Jobs succeeded in spite of some of the great flaws that he had, and what to me makes his story particularly touching and motivating and inspiring is that he learned. As we'll see as we cover sort of the arc of his life, he never, became warm and fuzzy and cuddly and, the most popular person in the room. But he learned through lots of his experiences. And that's part of what helped to make him such a great person, such a great historical figure in the end. And to give us a little bit of background, Isaacson says he was a master of putting together art and technology in ways that invented the future. Ideas, art, and technology. We're going to talk about the intersection of science and art, science and the humanities, technology and the liberal arts throughout our talk tonight. Because that was something that Jobs believed in fervently. He invented the future. A minute ago, I mentioned that he created things for people that they didn't know they needed yet. Okay? And that is one of the key underlying threads that goes throughout his story. Some leaders push innovation by being good at the big picture. Others do so by mastering the details. Jobs did both relentlessly. Okay, so we're going to also focus on the relentlessly part in our discussion tonight. Okay, he was a master at being focused. He could blot out other things, even if those other things were important, even if other people would think that those other things were more important than what he should be focusing on. He could laser focus on what it was he wanted to accomplish to the point where he was not only able to do that, but drag everybody else along with him to help to accomplish whatever he wanted to accomplish. And then before we start getting into the chronology, let's look at some of the quotes of Jobs himself. Okay, that's a little hard to read, so let me read them to you, okay? All of them make different points that I want to emphasize in tonight's talk. First, my passion has been to build an enduring company where people were motivated to make great products. Everything else was secondary. Sure, it was great to make a profit because that's what allowed you to make great products, but the products, not the profits, were the motivation, okay? Money was not his first motivation. Was he a rich guy? Absolutely. Although you'll learn tonight, he made most of his money probably not where you'd first guess he made most of his money. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But throughout, he was not inconsistent about this. Okay, what he cared about was the design. He cared about the product. He cared about making things that people would want. And yes, did money come from that? Absolutely, it did. Okay, but that's one of the first things. That's a characteristic of Steve Jobs. Secondly, some people say give the people what they want. That's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. He used to love to talk about the hockey player Wayne Gretzky, one of the greatest hockey players of all time. Jobs would describe Gretzky and say, good players skate to where the puck is. Gretzky skates to where the puck is going to be. He also liked to cite Henry Ford, who we showed on a slide just a moment ago. Henry Ford used to say, if I ask the people what they want, they would say faster horses. Okay? That Henry Ford knew that he knew that they didn't know yet that they wanted cars. They wanted automobiles. That was one of Jobs' philosophies as he reflected back on his life. And then thirdly, as I mentioned a moment ago, I think great artists and great engineers are similar in that they both have the desire to express themselves. In fact, some of the best people working on the original Mac were poets and musicians on the side. At his final, at the end of every one of his product launches, which were very famous, I'll show you a little clip of one in a minute, but I bet you can picture them. Okay, who wants to take a bet with me that this summer's actor is going to be wearing jeans and a black turtleneck? I didn't tonight because I didn't want anyone to think I was either pretending to be Steve Jobs or, the actor for this summer. But, in his regular his uniform, really, at those famous product launches, his very last one for the iPad 2 in 2011, he finished with a slide that showed street signs. It was the intersection of technology and liberal arts. And what he said about that on that particular occasion was this. I want to get the quote right. It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. That it's technology married with the liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields the results that make our hearts sing. Make our hearts sing. And so this is what makes him the greatest innovator, the most creative innovator of our time, is that he is fully embracing the artistic side, not just the tech side. I don't have this on my slides well, I do actually have this on my slides, in my lesson slides at the end. But even now, I'll just sort of interject here that I think we could use more of that. We could use more tech people, right? Left brain people who embrace the artistic side. We could use more of artistic people, the right brain, who embrace the technical side, who learn how to code, for instance. That's actually sort of a personal passion of mine. All right, so let's tell the story, okay? Jobs is a person of searing intensity. From a young age, he was able to master the power of persuasion in order to get what he wanted. He had several different techniques for this. One of them was he was very good at arguing the big picture to people. I'm going to give some examples of this a little bit later, but he explained to Steve Wozniak, we should have a company because it would be cool to have a company. To have, even if it fails, we will have owned a company, and that's something worth doing. One of his engineers, he was arguing with about the Macintosh, boot up time, how long it would take to boot up. And Steve Jobs said it has to be 15 seconds or less. And it was about 28 seconds or so, the boot up time. And he said, okay, I'm going to calculate for you how much time that is over the lifetime of some person waiting for their computer to boot up. And he calculated it was like several years worth of their lives, the big picture. And then, by the way, that engineer was able to cut 13 seconds off of the boot up time. That's another example of the reality distortion field, by the way, but I'll get to that in a sec. So he was able to show people the big picture. He mastered the technique of not blinking. Not blinking. He would stare at you, okay, with a withering stare until you were just so uncomfortable that you had to agree with whatever he wanted, give him whatever he wanted. He mastered those long pauses, well past the point when most people were uncomfortable. He would master those long pauses, followed by quick bursts of frenetic and frantic talking. Just conversational techniques for persuasion. Another thing that he did was everything to him was either great and perfect or it was crap. It was the worst thing ever. Okay, he recruited Hirschfeld, one of his Macintosh engineers, to come over from a different division of Apple by saying, everything you've done up until now is feces. Use a different word. It doesn't seem very like a great argument, very persuasive, right? But the people in his orbit would, they knew that good wasn't good enough. It had to be great. It was either great or it was crap, all right? So these are some of the techniques that he used, some of the very powerful persuasive techniques they would use. And this was evident even at a young age. I love this. There's a story of Steve Jobs in elementary school. It was on Hawaiian Shirt Day. And there's a picture of his class. It still exists. You can find it online, where there's one kid in just a t-shirt because that he didn't have his Hawaiian shirt. That kid was not Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the kid who forgot his shirt that day, but he managed to talk the shirt off the back of this other boy. Another time, he actually persuaded all the other kids at school that it was bring your pet to school day. It wasn't bring your pet to school day. And so I just love imagining all the poor teachers at that school with all the kids coming in with their cats and dogs and so on. So always he's had this ability to persuade. And then again, the focus that I mentioned. We're going to talk a lot about that. When Steve Jobs was focusing on something, he was laser focused to the detriment of everything else. Okay, we're not talking about not wasting time on social media or not eating another donut or all those things that are bad for you, right? We're talking about getting rid of good things so he could focus on great things. And again, sometimes that was really, really bad. Sometimes there were things he should not have been ignoring that he ignored, and we'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But laser focused, he had a passion for perfection. Again, the ferocious drive to get what it was that he wanted. And what he was not an engineer, okay? He was a designer. He was an artist. And also, of course, he was a marketer, and later he became a great organizer, a great CEO as well. But what he was interested in was perfection in simplicity and the aesthetics of design in addition to function. It had to work, but it also had to be beautiful. And we'll talk about that in a number of different contexts with regards to his creations. Again, as I've mentioned already, he was not a model boss. He was not a model human being. And so one of the key lessons that we want to take away from tonight's discussion is that Steve Jobs was not great because he was rude to everybody. He would have been great without all of that stuff, okay? That the other things about him were so great that they superseded some of his rudeness, some of his boorish behavior, his inconsiderate behavior. So in a sense, this is a tale that is both inspirational and cautionary. In fact, one of his contemporaries and rivals and friend, Bill Gates, said about Steve Jobs' management style, "Do not try this at home," which I think is pretty funny. Some of the things we'll talk about tonight, if you tried that with your circle or with your organization, with your friends, you'd be you'd be disaffiliated with that group in no time, I would imagine. He had these tremendous strengths. Generally speaking, he did not see boundaries or obstacles, expectations, or rules that he was breaking. He just didn't see those things. And again, that's one path to greatness, but it's also a path to everybody thinking you're a jerk. All right, So in the course of, as a result of this single-minded focus, of this intensity, of this focus, I'm going to claim to you that he revolutionized 6 different industries: the personal computer, movies, music, telephones, laptop, tablet computing, and then I'm going to throw one in that you wouldn't necessarily think of: digital publishing. I'll talk about that a little. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So this is the organization of my talk. We'll talk about it in these 6 things, and then we'll fill in some of the gaps, some of the interpersonal stuff, and finish up with some lessons, and then hopefully a nice discussion after that. So first up is personal computing, and where we start is Steve Jobs at the age of 12. He was born in 1955, 1967. We don't have blocked, or what's the word I'm looking for? Private phone numbers, unlisted phone numbers. So Jobs needs a part for a project that he's working on. So what does he do? You guys all heard of Hewlett Packard, the computer company? Okay, Bill Hewlett is one of the greatest computer executives of all time. He is at the height of his fame in the 60s. Steve Jobs calls him up. 12 years old, he calls him up and says, "Hey, could you send me this part that I need? And oh, by the way, I also want a summer job." Gets them both. Hewlett talked with him for 20 minutes, sends the little kid his part that he needs, and gives him a summer job. His parents moved to Los Altos, California, where he goes to high school at Homestead High, graduates in 1972. There he meets a couple of critically important people. First of all, he meets Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was 5 years older, so he had graduated from Homestead, but he also went to that same high school. He was at the University of California at that time. He also meets KrisAnne Brennan. KrisAnne Brennan, these two become very important partners in Steve Jobs' life. Woz, a lifelong partner. KrisAnne Brennan, on and off romantic and artistic collaborator partner. Important enough that on the table back there is KrisAnne Brennan's autobiography, My Life with Steve Jobs. So we'll talk about her a little bit later on. The partnership between Woz and Jobs is formed immediately. Woz is the engineer. He's the computer guy. He's the tech guy, right? He belongs to an early computer club where they love to just share ideas, and if they came up with something, they just gave it to everyone else. Like, this is cool. I figured out how to create this Pong game. I created a circuit board for the Pong game, and he just like, hey, I'm going to go show this to the guys at the club. I created this circuit board for what would become the Apple I computer. I'm going to just go show this to everybody so they can make their own personal computers. And Jobs is like, hold on, we can sell that thing, okay? But where that comes from, it comes earlier, okay? So during this time period, Woz and Jobs, they build a TV scrambler, okay, that messes up with people's TV signals. So you're watching TV and the TV just blanks out. So they would go over to the California campus, and they would just sit outside people's apartments and make their TVs fry. But what they love to do, again, this is just prank stuff, right? But what they would love to do is they would get the people to behave in weird ways to get their TV to work again, right? So if they put their hand on the TV, Jobs and Wozniak would make the TV work again, and then let the hand comes away, it starts working, so that people are standing with their hand on the TV. Or stand up on one leg, right? Get people, again, I know it's just a silly story, but this is in Jobs' mind. This is getting people to change their lives with technology, okay, which he does again and again and again later in a much less pranky sort of way. Another key foundation to the Apple story is that at this time they built something called the Blue Box. Some of you, I bet actually pretty much this whole audience is going to remember back when long distance calls actually cost money. Remember that? Okay, and then the way the phones worked was based on a system of tones. Basically what would happen is if the phone heard the right tone, it would connect you, it would put you through. So Jobs and Wozniak built this Blue Box that basically let them fake out the phone so they could make calls for free. The best story about that is one night they called the Vatican. They want to talk to the Pope. This is totally true story. So Wozniak is on the phone. He's pretending he's Henry Kissinger. Okay, well, Henry Kissinger has a very distinct accent, but they got all the way to the point where the Pope was awakened. The Pope was awakened and coming to the phone, and then one of his cardinals came on the phone line and said, "You're not Henry Kissinger," and they hung up. But that's just a great story. But what happened was Woz is just making this for a goof. Jobs comes in and says, "We could sell that." And they did. They made a nice little chunk of change selling the blue box to. They'd sell it to college students and other of their friends and so on. It's totally illegal, of course, but they created this device, and you see the beginnings of their partnership, right? You see not only changing people's behavior with technology, but you see this idea of Woz is the tech guy, okay? Jobs is the marketer. He's the one who sees the potential, who says we could sell this. So and that's really important to remember. We don't want to go straight to Apple. Okay, we want to look at the things that Jobs was good at and Wozniak was good at first before we get to the story that everybody knows. Again, so there wouldn't have been Apple if not for the blue boxes. These are all their high school yearbook pictures right here. Another sort of old picture. Next Jobs goes to college. Sort of passive aggressively, his adoptive parents, whom he considered his parents, had promised his biological parents that they would send him to college. Jobs did not want to go to college. He did not see the point of it. He didn't want to go. So again, passively aggressively, he picks Reed College in Oregon, which is absolutely the most expensive college in the United States at the time. So, Mom and Dad, you're going to make me go? You're going to have to pay for it. So that he did. He went for one semester. Okay. He complained to Woz, who had graduated by then, that they're just making me go to all these classes. And Woz is like, well, yeah, that's what they do. I mean, that's the idea. And but interestingly, though, he stayed for the rest of the year with the dean's permission, just auditing whatever he wanted. Okay, he was a true sort of hippie of the times. And what he did, just one quick story there that's going to be important later. One of the classes he sort of wandered into was a calligraphy class, where he learned sort of the artistry of text, the artistry of fonts. You can probably see where I'm going to end up going with that a little bit later on in the talk. So he's at Reed College for a year. There he meets another character named Robert Friedland, who, if you look him up, he is a billionaire. He is in the mining industry. At the time, he was another hippie like Jobs. He was a drug dealer. Eventually, he spent time in federal prison as a result, and now he's a billionaire. So you can sort of see where they were kind of kindred spirits. Friedland was someone who was basically Jobs' first mentor. One of the things that he says about Jobs is whatever he was interested in, he would generally carry to an irrational extreme, which, if you think of it, is a pretty good business tip, right? Find something simple, focus on it to an irrational extreme. He also taught Jobs the reality distortion field. That's the idea that by your power of your personality, by the power of your persuasion, you can convince anybody around you of anything. Well, I'm going to get more into that in just a little bit, but that was one of the lessons that he learned from Friedland. Let's see. And then he goes to Atari, where the reason I went to this side is he learns that again. His next mentor, the owner of Atari, says, pretend you are totally in control and people will believe that you are. Again, that's another element of the reality distortion field. Okay, so I've mentioned all of that stuff. Okay, then he goes to Atari after he drops out of Reed. He goes and gets a job at Atari because he saw an ad in the newspaper that said, have fun, make money. Have fun, make money. It's one of the lessons he learned in his life at a formative stage. So there he goes to Atari. He goes in the lobby. Now at this point, okay, one of Jobs' things that he is laser focused on is his diet. All his life, he followed these sort of weird diets. At this time, he was something called a fruitarian. Basically, all he ate was fruit, mostly apples, which actually does become relevant later on. But he had read somewhere that if you don't eat, the reason that your perspiration smells is because of meat. Well, he thought, well, I'm not eating meat, so I don't need to shower. Everyone told him, Steve, you stink. dude, you got to go take a shower, right? He would not listen. He knew better than everybody, right? The rules did not apply to Steve Jobs. So that he didn't wear shoes either. So this stinky hippie shows up with no shoes, dirty feet, shows up in the lobby of Atari and says, I'm not leaving until you give me a job. Not leaving. And so what the receptionist calls up to Nolan Bushnell, and ultimately he ends up getting a job. One of the things he learns at Atari is the idea of simplicity. He hated any game if it needed an instruction manual. Okay, any game that was any good at all should be something you can just figure out by plugging it into the cartridge. Everybody have an Atari? Yeah, I loved that thing. Playing all those great games on the Atari. Bushnell taught him that a young person can start a business. A product should be so simple. I said the manual thing, and then pretend you're totally in control, and people will believe that you are. So there was, even at this time, there was this infectious nature of his belief, his confidence. He conveyed to people that if I can do anything, and if you're with me, then you can do it too. Again, these are the nascent beginnings of the reality distortion field. Which is a double-edged sword. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too, which is a double-edged sword. So here we have the famous garage. Okay, the garage at Chris Drive in Los Altos. This is Steve Jobs' parents' garage. This is where they start Apple. Remember, I'm still talking about the personal computer here. I'm getting to it, I promise. So you've probably heard this story before. Woz sells his HP calculator. Jobs sells his VW bus. They make $1,300 and they start a business. Now, what they started with, they started in Jobs' garage, which is now a protected historical landmark. And Woz had no interest in starting a company. He just wanted to give it away, right? Let everybody have this. What this was a circuit board that he built. Personal computers back then were not like, say the least, not like they are now. You just sold a circuit board. The hobbyist would then have to plug it into a TV, plug it into a keyboard, plug it into a cassette player to store files and so on and so forth. Okay, so all they're doing is they're selling the circuit board for $50. They had one computer distributor named Paul Terrell who asked them for, I'll take 50, but you have to build it. Okay, pardon? 50 of I'll take 50 Apple ones, but you have to build it for me. You have to give me the monitor, the TV, and the keyboard, and the memory, and so on. Okay, what do you think Jobs learns from that? Regular people don't just want the parts. They want it all encompassing. And if you know anything about Apple products, you know that was gospel to him from then on. Okay, you know, the iMac, for instance, just one thing, everything's built into it. Okay. So that's one of the things that he learns in this process. The Apple company, Apple is incorporated on April 1st of 1976. Again, he persuaded Woz by saying, even if we lose our money, it's just going to be cool that we have a company. Now, at this point in time, he had read that the most successful publicist out there was a guy named Regis McKenna. So he goes off and he calls him up, and Regis says, no, I'm not going to go work for two hippies in a garage. So he calls him up again the next day. And the next day for 2 weeks until Regis McKenna is like, okay, fine, I'll be your publicist. Regis McKenna comes up with the Apple logo. Regis McKenna finds them investor funding, and their first CEO, whose name was Michael Scott, by the way, just like in The Office, the TV show. He does all of those things with Apple forever. Again, Jobs gets what he wants, right? The powers of persuasion, he gets what he wants. Also, McKenna brings in someone named Mike Markkula, who will become a little bit important later on in the story. Mike Markkula brings to Apple its operating principles for the history of the company, including today, which are the following. Empathize, know what your customer wants. Focus, we've talked about that. Don't get distracted by other things. And impute. Impute means to convince your customer of the value of what you're selling. Convince them of the value of the brand. Wow, was Steve Jobs good at that, okay? So again, empathize. Empathize, focus, impute. Those are the three principles of Apple that were brought to him indirectly by Regis McKenna back at that time. Okay, so that insight about wanting everything kind of put together leads to the Apple II, right? Anybody have an Apple II back in the day? Yeah, a few of you did. The Apple II was inspired by Steve Jobs seeing a Cuisinart food processor at the store. He just thought it was clean. He thought the lines were artistic and so on. He said, "That's what I want." And so, for the first time, we kind of sort of see that real design aesthetic of Steve Jobs. And they build the Apple II. The Apple II becomes they unveiled it at the 1978 West Coast Computer Fair. Now, every new technology needs what's called the killer app. Okay, the killer app is like, okay, that's great, but what can I do with it? Okay, the killer app that came out was something called VisiCalc, which I wonder if some of you remember. That was the very first spreadsheet. The very first spreadsheet, and that's what made the Apple II a huge, huge, huge success. They marketed it for 16 years, 6 million of them were sold, and this is where we date the start of the personal computer. Apple went public in 1980, and it just thought popped into my head as I was driving over to you guys. Any of you seen the movie Forrest Gump? At the end of Forrest Gump, Forrest says, "I invested in this fruit company," and of course, we're all to understand, obviously, this makes a fortune because they're already having to have this great product. Remember Nolan Bushnell from Atari? They offered him a third of the company for $50,000, and he says no. He will share with people that I love to tell that story whenever I'm not crying. says Nolan Bushnell. At this point, he recruits. I've already mentioned the software engineer he recruited later by saying everything you've done up until now has been crap. Here he recruits John Sculley, who was the CEO of Pepsi. He recruits him to become the CEO of Apple by basically saying, "You want to sell sugar water the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" And this works. John Sculley comes and becomes the CEO of Apple. Steve Wozniak goes on leave, and Jobs wants something of his own. So he starts a new division of Apple where he's building something called the Lisa computer. He claims to everybody that that stands for Local Integrated Software Architecture. All the other computer folks in the crowd can attest that doesn't mean anything. At the age of 23, it's the same age that Steve Jobs' birth parents were when he was born. He fathers a daughter with Chris Ann Brennan. Her name is Lisa. Steve Jobs, in just one of the most reprehensible sort of periods of his life, he absolutely denies paternity. He suggests to others that Chris Ann was promiscuous. He suggests that he himself was infertile. And even when a DNA test comes in that says it's 94.6% likely that he's the father, he says, well, that's the huge percentage of other people that could be the father. For years and years, he denies paternity, but inexplicably, I don't have any theory for this. He names this computer Lisa. Later on, before he died, he suggested, well, yeah, of course, that was named after my daughter. Everybody knew that, right? But why do it and lie about it? You know, just one of those little fascinating footnotes in the entire story. Okay, so he's working on the Lisa. It was during the production of the Lisa that Jobs goes and visits Xerox PARC in Palo Alto. Xerox, we know as, copier, paper company. Xerox at that time was a powerhouse of a tech company. Okay, they invented all kinds of different things. During this period, they were working on something called the graphical user interface. Instead of just typing stuff in, we have icons, folders, we have files and so on. And also they invented the mouse. And Steve Jobs has heard about this. He heard about it from a colleague, so he goes and visits. Now the engineers at Xerox know exactly what they have, but the big bosses don't. So Steve is talking to the big bosses and he's basically saying, hey, can I buy this from you? He took a tour. Actually, at the tour, the engineers wouldn't show it to him. They kept sort of faking him out, and he was just like, just manic in terms of his frustration. And he's yelling at them and shouting at them. He's going out to the hallway and calling the big bosses in New York and so on. And finally, the bosses say to the engineers, just show him the stuff, show him the whole thing. And of course, he just loses it. He's immediately able to see this is where computers are going to go, the graphical user interface. And so he actually manages to get Xerox to sell it to Apple for $50,000. And you see where Apple is now. You see where Xerox, not like Xerox is a failing company or anything, but they're not making computers. So that was one of those times when Jobs essentially stole something, right? Was fond of saying that he was fond of quoting Picasso: "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." And then Jobs says, "We've always been shameless about stealing great ideas." That starts from that visit to Xerox PARC. But he is a terrible manager, okay? He is mean to people. He runs roughshod over people. He, again, wants Lisa to be a computer for everybody, but they're building it just for the education market. And so Mike Scott, who was the CEO at that time, and Mike Markula basically strip him of all his the responsibility for Lisa. They take him off the job. They say, "Here, go work on this other little project. They're building this thing over here called the Macintosh." Yeah, exactly. So Jobs, of course, takes the GUI, the graphical user interface, and the mouse with him over to the Macintosh, and he becomes a tyrant over there. Okay, this is where we really see, let me finish this and then I'll come back to that in just a second. The Macintosh was released on January 24th, just today. I love that. Kind of fell on the anniversary in 1984. And one of the things that he did was he had all the engineers come in at the end and they signed the inside of the case. So every case of a Macintosh has the signatures of its designers inside where no one will ever see it, because great artists sign their work. This is one of the ways that Jobs would just get people's loyalty, sort of an us versus them kind of mentality. Although in this case, it was us versus them against the rest of Apple too. And some of you remember this? You remember the famous Apple commercial that showed at the Super Bowl? Let's see if it'll play for me this time. Actually, you know what? I'm running a little late already, so I'm not gonna play it. You guys can look it up on YouTube. It's a classic, 1984 themed. 1984 won't be like 1984 the book. And this was all poking fun at IBM, because by this point IBM had gotten into the PC market and they were dominating with Windows and Bill Gates and all that stuff. And so this was to just show that the Macintosh is cool. The Macintosh is anti-establishment and so on. And it worked. It was the hottest thing going, right? For a while. Okay, but IBM ended up winning that battle. A few years later, Macintosh was not even making 10% of its sales projections. And that's what leads us to a discussion of the reality distortion field. During the time when Steve Jobs was working on the Macintosh, okay, we had one of the Mac team members saying, in his presence, reality is malleable. He can convince you of practically anything. One of his quotes from this time is, "My peer group is not my peer group. History's greatest minds are my peer group." Okay? It's crazy for someone to say that, except what happened? I think you could argue that he made that true. Over time, he made that true, right? So the ordinary rules didn't apply. The rules of physics didn't apply. The rules of time didn't apply. When you were with Steve Jobs, reality didn't apply. So you have the, one of the examples is they had, the Mac software was going to be 2 weeks late, just 2 weeks late. They're like, "Steve, we've got to have 2 more weeks." They call him up. He's in New York getting ready for the launch already. And so there's a long pause on the phone line, and Steve Jobs says, "You can do it. I'm shipping it. It's being shipped on the date, and all your names are going to be on it. You can do it." Because that's a veiled threat too, right? Sure enough, they don't sleep, they don't eat, they work for the time until the launch, and that thing goes out as expected. The reality distortion field. As people say though, there are some upsides to this demanding and wounding behavior. Oh, I'm sorry. Isaacson calls it a confounding combination of charismatic, theatrical style, indomitable will, eagerness to bend any fact to fit the purpose at hand. But this was very, very big upside and downside to this, right? This wounded people. But the people who made it, though, were stronger as a result. There are some upsides to this demanding and wounding behavior. People who are not crushed are stronger. We did better work out of both fear and eagerness to please. So sort of the legend of Steve Jobs is born at this point, the reality distortion field. But he applies it to his own life too. He applies it to his daughter, Lisa. I don't want to be a parent, so I'm going to make the reality different. Later, when he gets sick, I don't want to have cancer, so I'm going to make the reality different. Right? There are very, very, very poor applications of the reality distortion field. Plus, there were times when projects actually were late. His next project, which I'm going to get to in a second, was a failure in large part because he was so obsessed with getting the design right. And he insisted that it could all be done in this certain amount of space and so on. But then again, there's a certain insight to the reality distortion field too. That if you have the right kind of personality and you're willing to buy into it, you can do great things just like your boss, just like Steve Jobs. And then again, also there was this us versus them mentality that he really fostered as well. It was tribal in a sense. And this is what leads to his downfall, in fact. Okay? He was such a problem, being a jerk, okay? Having temper tantrums, having enemies, having everyone hate you, just dumping on everyone's ideas, and then if an idea is good, actually stealing it. That works great if you're successful. Okay, well, I shouldn't say it works right. People will put up with that if you're successful. When the Mac is only selling 10% of what its targeted market was, no, not happening anymore. So by this time, John Sculley is CEO. Jobs gets wind that Sculley and Markkula are getting ready to reorganize the company. Because essentially, Macintosh was a whole separate division of Apple. They were in a completely different office space. So they were sort of like, off the leash, if you will. So Jobs and Sculley and Markkula were going to reorganize the company, which essentially would have stripped Jobs of all of his responsibility. So he plans a coup. He plans on going in and persuading the board that he should be in charge, and he fails. Okay. Instead, he is fired. He is ousted from the company. So in 1985, the co-founder of Apple is gone. And that leads us to what are called in his biography the wilderness years, from 1985 to 1997. So let me tell you a little bit about what happens, because there's some great learning that happens here. Both Steve Jobs and Apple hit rock bottom after this. But you could argue, looking back from 2023, that it was the best thing for both of them. First thing Jobs does is makes a new company, calls it Next. N-E-X-T. This is a case where at this point he has sort of lost his ability to empathize. He's lost his ability to sort of really know his market, because this is for colleges. This is for educational establishments. It's a gorgeous carbonite cube that has everything built into it. Some things we forget if we just zip past this too fast. Well, I actually forgot one. That Apple I is the first time anyone has ever pressed a keyboard and had a character appear on the screen. When Woz accomplished that the first time ever, right? We take that for granted. The Next, you could email pictures. You're like, yeah, so we all know we could email. You couldn't until the Next was created. Okay, the Next could play music. First computer that could ever play music. The problem was he mistargeted his audience. His audience was colleges, and he's charging $10,000, $12,000 for a computer in the late 80s. Okay, complete flop. Nobody bought it. They did develop a really cool operating system. They developed a really cool web development package, which later would become what iTunes and the Apple Store are based on. Hold that thought about the operating system, because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. It's called Next Step, is the operating system that they built. But he's at a low point here. Okay, he is. All of those positive qualities that he had that got him to a rise, he stopped doing, right? He lost his empathy, where, if rudeness is a side product of success, people can live with it. But for Jobs, it became the goal. He liked being rude to people. He liked being a jerk. He started to believe his own legend. So he stopped critical thinking. He didn't do any market analysis. He didn't. He was a partner with Wozniak. He was partnered with great smart people before. Now he thought he could just do it on his own. Okay, and we see the result. He is at his absolute lowest point right here, but he still has a lot of friends. So he's networking, talking with a great computer scientist named Alan Kay, who introduces him to another computer scientist named Ed Catmull, who happens to work for George Lucas's computer animation company, computer animation division. George Lucas is going through a divorce. He needs some cash, right? So he's going to sell off his computer animation division. So with Catmull's help, Jobs purchases this computer animation division for $5 million, plus $5 million more in investment. So he basically spent $10 million of his own money for this computer animation division. Now, he wanted it to build computers. He had this idea that everybody would want to create 3D graphics on their computers, right? Yeah, maybe not such a great envisioning of the future. But all the while, there's this kind of subgroup of this new company that's trying to make movies. Okay, they're doing computer animation, and Jobs is like, that's cool. That's great to show off the technology so that we can sell the technology later on. Well, after a while, this is all failing. None of it is selling. Again, Jobs is almost bankrupt. And they have hired from Disney an animator by the name of John Lasseter. John Lasseter loves to make movies, okay? And he wants to make a short movie that he doesn't have enough money for. He has this idea, and Jobs puts in personally $50 million to make a little short movie called Tin Toy. Anybody seen this? Tin Toy, okay? Jobs says to Lasseter, where did I put it on there? Oh yeah, all I ask is that you make it great. I just want you to make it great. And it was great. It won the Academy Award for short feature. Disney then says, ooh, we want him back. We want John Lasseter back. But he was so loyal to Steve Jobs that he said, nope, not going back. But he wants to make a feature film. He wants to make a full-length computer animated 3D movie. And they don't have any kind of money for that. So since Lasseter won't go back to Disney, Disney cuts a deal with this new company, okay? And so it basically says, we'll finance this movie and we'll distribute it, okay? And we'll give you 12% of the cut. And this new company could just say, well, okay, that sounds good. And this company I probably failed to mention is called Pixar, and they go and make this. All right, so Toy Story comes out. Jobs knows it's great, right? He knows it's great. So he makes a calculated gamble that this company, Pixar, is going to go public 1 week after Toy Story opens, right? They have nothing. They have nothing but this 3-picture deal with Disney where they get 12% of the take. If the movie flops, this is it. This is it. That's the end of it, right? Well, you guys all know what happened. Toy Story becomes one of the highest grossing movies of all time. They are on this very firm financial footing. And at this point, oh shoot, I'm totally blanking on Michael Eisner, who is the CEO of Disney. He's playing hardball with Jobs. Jobs wants to renegotiate the deal. Guess who loses their job? Michael Eisner loses his job. Bob Iger comes in, just interesting because some of you may know he just came back to Disney this year. But Bob Iger comes in, first person he calls is Steve Jobs. We'll renegotiate the deal. We'll renegotiate the deal. So they renegotiate the deal so that it's 50-50. They get 50, Disney gives the investment and the distribution. And then what happens is they split the profits 50-50. So basically, Pixar becomes a big success, 10 straight hit movies. In 2006, Disney buys Pixar for $7.6 billion. Okay, Steve Jobs invested $10 million, remember. He makes him personally $1.2 billion, which is far more than he ever made at Apple. And then he becomes the largest stakeholder of Disney, including Roy Disney and the other Disney children. When he dies and passes that inheritance along to his children, again, he's that is by far the greatest source of his wealth. So that's the Pixar story. I'm going to move along a little faster here. So next comes music. Next comes music. What they at this point, real quick, I'm going to tell the story quickly because I know I'm running out of time. Apple is foundering. Okay, Apple cannot update their operating system. They cannot do anything innovative. They're just floating in circles. So they call up Steve Jobs and say, "Hey, remember that operating system for Next? Could we buy that?" And Steve Jobs puts aside his resentment and says, "Sure." He goes and meets with them. Long story short, they're led by a weak CEO by the name of Gil Amelio, who Jobs is able to manipulate. He is fully dishonest. He lies to him, lies to John Scully, makes them think they're best buddies and so on. So he sells them the operating system, gets a job as an advisor on the board of directors, and ultimately takes over the company. He basically has a coup, has himself installed as CEO, and in 1997, Steve Jobs is back at Apple. But he has learned some things. One of the main things that he has learned from his time at Pixar is he was so proud of being part of these great things when he was not the one solely responsible for them. Right? He was just an executive at Pixar. He wasn't making the movies. And he learned from that. He learned, I don't have to be such a control freak. I can be the enabler of these great things. And that leads to this incredible hot streak. You guys might remember in the late 80s, the whole idea of, in the 90s, the whole idea of digital music was the wild, wild west. Remember Napster? Everybody just downloaded stuff for free, okay? Completely illegally downloaded stuff for free. Steve Jobs and all of his team at Apple, they loved music. They were all about music. So it was a passion project for them to make their own music player, which they did. Let's see, I want to make sure I don't skip something here. So I'm working my way up to the music, basically. When he fired the whole board, that included Mike Markula, he went and had an exit interview with him, and Markula said, a great company knows how to reinvent itself. And that's the story of Apple and Steve Jobs for the next decade or so. So what happens next is, first thing Jobs does is he gets a great team around him. Lesson. Next thing he does is calls Bill Gates and settles the decade-long lawsuit over Windows, which Microsoft clearly stole. Macintosh would clearly get a multi-billion-dollar settlement eventually, but Apple might not exist anymore by the time they got it. So he talked Gates into sort of a peace treaty, which included Gates investing in the company. And he put out the Think Different ads. You guys remember these? Think Different. This is, again, in 1997, when Steve Jobs is back and Apple is foundering. Apple's about to go bankrupt, just like Pixar was about to go bankrupt. But settling with Gates, putting out this ad, bought them time. And they used that time to build first the iMac. Okay, guys, any of you have an iMac? Again, absolute focus on design, on the beauty of the thing, a computer as a work of art. So he builds the iMac, has a release, and the iMac is a gigantic success. Basically what Jobs says, remember, focus. He comes in, he cuts out all of the extraneous stuff Apple's working on. We're going to build this perfect iMac computer. They do. It's the best computer, the best seller of all time for Apple, of computers for that matter. And that, again, now the company's not going to go bankrupt, okay? This deal with Gates, the ad that buys them time to build the iMac. The iMac brings them the money, and then they can start doing all this other cool stuff. So what they do is they create the iPod, they create iTunes, and they tightly integrate all of their devices, right? If you have an iPod, you need an iMac to be able to load it up with music. And so Jobs realizes, this is just genius. Jobs realizes, wait. They need the iMac if they have the iPod. So we're just going to take all of our advertising budget and put it in the iPod. The more iPods we sell, we're going to sell iMacs too, right? we get double the bang for our buck. And then, of course, what did he do? He killed all the other music players. Every other one that was out there, he just wiped them out. iPod became the thing that you get to play music. And then the other thing, again, I mentioned it was the wild, wild west. The record companies were not cool with all this digital music stuff, but who solved that problem? Steve Jobs. He cuts a deal with them, and that enables them to be able to sell their songs on iTunes. Everybody gets a cut, everybody's happy. Revolutionized the music industry to the way that it is today. Okay, then think different ads. And then here's the thing, Microsoft rushes to put out their own player, okay? The Zune, anybody remember the Zune? It was crap, right? Never had a chance, DOA, right? Dead on arrival. And what Jobs said about that was, we made the iPod for ourselves. And when you make something for yourself or your best friend or your family, you're not going to cheese out. I love that phrase. If you don't love something, you're not going to go the extra mile, work the extra weekend, challenge the status quo as much, okay? Do what you love. The iPod was great because the makers loved it. Did they make a lot of money? Of course they did, but they loved what they were doing, all right? And again, here, there's a great story with the iPod in the reality distortion field where, no, that's the iPhone, never mind. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Here is, I'm not going to play this again because I'm running out of time, but you can look this up on YouTube. This is one of the classic launches that Steve Jobs would always do with his turtleneck and his jeans. This was the launch of the iPhone. He starts this off by saying, I've never been so excited in my life to share this with you, okay? The iPhone, folks, is right up there with the Model T, right? The smartphone has changed society, changed the way we do things with technology. Now, where did it come from? Jobs was always worried about, what are we missing, okay? How could we mess up? What could screw us up here? And his idea was the iPod is going to be ruined by people's phones. So what should we do? Let's build our own phone, okay? Another reality distortion field story that I love is he was working with the company Corning for the glass for the iPhone. It's called Gorilla Glass. And the CEO of Corning says, we can't do that. We can't mass produce that in the numbers that you need. And Steve Jobs says, don't be afraid. And they said, we're not afraid. It's just a question of, you can do it. Wrap your mind around it. You can do it. Sure enough, they did it. It was successful. On the day of the iPhone's release, Steve Jobs sent a note to the Corning CEO saying, we couldn't have done this without you. It was the reality distortion field, right? Real quick, iPhones sold over 1 billion units. It is the most successful consumer product of all time. Number 2 are the Harry Potter books. The Harry Potter books collectively have sold about 500 million, less than half of the iPhone. Crazy, crazy stuff. Tablet computing. This is Jobs in January of 2010, demonstrating the iPad. Digital publishing, I mentioned, was the 6th thing. You guys remember he took that calligraphy class at Reed, okay? And then he went back and said, the Macintosh has to have fonts, has to have proportional fonts, not just the ones that are all the same width apart. And so he insisted that they all be named after great cities too. So that's where you get the Chicago font, you get the Los Angeles font, New York font, and so on. You use those on your computer, that's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the one who named those, right? And again, that also goes together with the laser writer. The laser writer, which is, I'm out of sequence here, but the laser writer was one of the things that Apple put out in Steve Jobs' first time there. Okay, so those are the 6 things. Let's wrap this up. Few more stories from his life, okay? Again, so he was born in 1955, and he was put up for adoption. His parents were 23 years old. They were not married. Their parents were, his birth father was a Syrian immigrant, and both sets of parents objected to their union, so they were not allowed to get married. They put Jobs up for adoption. He was adopted by Clara and Paul Jobs, who, I need to start moving quicker. So I'm going to skip to possibly, I think, the coolest story in this entire narrative. So Jobs is adopted by Paul and Claire. Later on, he discovers that he has a biological sister. His birth parents had a sister later. At 5 years old, their father left them. Okay, and so was just raised by her mother. Her name is Mona Simpson. She's a novelist. So Mona, at one point, her mom tells her, "You have a biological brother." She does the work and finds out that it's Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is my biological brother. So she goes and meets with him and tells him that she's going to go find her birth father and, confront him, talk to him. So she goes and meets him. He was a restaurateur in Southern California. And he tells her, "Oh, it's nice to see you again. I have all these other restaurants up and down California. There's one used to have in Silicon Valley. And would you believe it? Steve Jobs used to come in there all the time. He was a great guy, great tipper, and so on." So she doesn't tell him that Steve Jobs is your son, by the way, but she does tell Steve, and he ultimately ends up meeting with the father. Never forgives him, but meets with the father. I talked about Chris Ann and Lisa. He did marry in 1991 to a woman named Laureen Powell, who was strong enough to stand up with them. Had 3 children. That really mellowed him a lot for the second time at Apple. And one time, one of Steve Jobs' kids called Larry Ellison our rich friend, without any real understanding or knowledge that they themselves were incredibly rich. In 2003, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I'm not a medical professional, but I am told that it was the one kind of pancreatic cancer that was solved. That was curable. Reality distortion field. Jobs tries acupuncture. He tries internet remedies. He tries everything under the sun, including some really wonky ones, which you can read about if you like. 9 months he puts it off before he has surgery, and when he does, it's too late. He does have a remission for a while, at which time he does one of the most famous commencement addresses in history, one of the most viewed commencement addresses at Stanford in 2005. Unfortunately, he does ultimately relapse again. In 2009, his liver fails. He has a liver transplant, which is successful, but it does indicate that everything is metastasized. I can see that it's time to get to questions, so I'm going to skip those. Okay, hopefully we can make these slides available somehow, because I think we've probably hit a lot of the lessons as we've gone through, so those are just kind of a summary. Let me leave you with this. This is also from that commencement address, but I think this is what I personally would like to impart to you from the life of Steve Jobs, which is the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it, keep looking, don't settle. And then I have some my primary resources is Isaacson's biography, which is on that table back there. I would also recommend to you Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which talks about Steve Jobs, and then The Innovators, which is the history of computing technology, also by Walter Isaacson, has some great stuff about Steve Jobs. And thank you.
Okay, sir, you're the first one. Yeah.
What really happened between Steve Jobs and Wozniak? What was the factor between those two breaking up?
They were friends all the way until Jobs' death. There was not a huge falling out. There were some things that Jobs did that were disrespectful to Woz. He lied to him sometimes. There was a big bonus that Woz helped him get from Atari that he lied to him about how much it was, and then he kept the rest himself. But for the most part, I don't think there was a falling out between the two. Woz is still kicking. I mean, he's retired, but he goes around as a visiting scholar at different universities. In fact, my daughter's school, High Point University in North Carolina, she's graduated now, but while she was there, he spent a whole year there, just as a scholar in residence. So yeah, he's doing fine. He was the tech guy. He was the tech side of the partnership. Yeah.
I was privileged to hear a talk by Steve Wozniak. He came to the Apple Computer Club in Charlotte in the mid-80s. Apparently he's still doing it. So
good. Yeah.
I'm really surprised at that.
Really admire him. I mean, the partnership of Wozniak and Jobs illustrates, I think, a really important point that a lot of you might really appreciate is that there are zealots on both sides of the open source and proprietary arguments with regards to technology. You know, technology should be developed to be sold, you know, to make a profit, or technology should be free. Technology should be given away. Woz was on this side, Jobs was on this side, but in truth, they go together. They push each other, right? You know, Microsoft comes up with Microsoft Office, and then an open source version of it comes out. Then Microsoft Office has to get better, and so on and so forth. So I do think it's a real symbiotic relationship.
Your next question is all the way here in the back.
Yeah, so one thing I thought was interesting was when you were talking about the other MP3 players and how they all just kind of fizzled out, or he killed them all. Like, what did that look like? What kind of...
Well, interesting. That's a great question, because the iPod was not the best in every way. It had smaller storage than the other ones that existed. It had it was heavier, but it had the user interface. One of the reality distortion field examples was that Jobs insisted fewer than 3 clicks to get to any song. Fewer than 3 clicks. And I think you got to find the album. You got to find the artist, find the album, find the track. That's where the spool wheel comes from. You know, this doesn't count as a click, right? So you spool, 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 click to, you know, and so on and so forth. So, you know, he demanded that they figure out how to do that, and they were successful. So all the other, I had one. I had a different player back at that time. You know, it had buttons on it, and, you know, like a little screen and everything. But that's something that some of the folks my age in the audience might remember, is there were other players before the iPod. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay.
We have a question from someone watching the live stream.
Oh, the live stream.
Jobs' music inspirations, Dylan and the Beatles, for example, what are your thoughts on how they influenced his sense of style and innovation?
Excellent question. In fact, if you will allow me to point to my slides again, okay, here, one of the lessons of Steve Jobs' life is you learn from all your experiences. And the first one was craftsmanship from his dad. His dad taught him that if you're building a fence and no one's going to see the other side of the fence, you sand it and paint it anyway, okay? Number 4 is don't settle for average. He had a bootleg CD of the creative process for the song Strawberry Fields, like the original version of it, and then John and Paul would like give and take and make some changes, and there'd be another version of it and so on. He played it over and over again because he loved to learn about that process of perfection. And don't settle for good. Don't settle for good. You know, halfway through, Strawberry Fields would have been fine. It probably would have been a hit, but it's a classic because they never stopped working on it. So I hope that's a great question, whoever was online, because that teed me right up. That was Xerox PARC. The researchers at Xerox PARC, P-A-R-C is how you spell that, but they are the ones who came up with the mouse, and Jobs stole it. I mean, you know, for $50K.
My question was, how big was the first phone?
The very
first
first
phone,
iPhone. How big
That's a
was
great question. The first phone was not a lot bigger than phones now. It wasn't like a big, you know, chunky thing or anything. I wish I could give you measurements. Do you have a phone? Okay, let's see Dad's phone. Actually, you know, because you know what's happening is phones are getting bigger again now. So I'd say the original iPhone was actually probably a little smaller than Mom's phone. Oh, look, is that an original? Okay. Well, I guess that was a dumb question. But you can see, but actually, where I'm standing, yours is definitely smaller than hers over there.
I think the original was like 3.4 inches diagonal.
Thank you. For the young man who asked the question, it was not gigantic. It was, in fact, phones have weirdly started getting bigger again in the recent years. Yeah.
Okay, Mom has a question now.
What can you tell us about his children? Are they part of the family business?
They are not. His children, he has 3 children, 3 children with Laureen Powell, and they are basically sheltered from the limelight. So they're not part of Apple. Lisa is, Mona Simpson, his biological sister, is a novelist. And I did read in my research what Lisa is doing, but I've actually kind of blanked on it. But, oh, and then I should mention, if I may interject, that in the end, he did reconcile with Lisa. You know, Lisa lived with him for a while. He reconciled with her. In his last days, he tried to pass along some of his wisdom. He met with Larry Page from Google. He agreed to this unsparing biography, the Isaacson biography, that was finished like weeks after his death, because he wanted to share something with the next generation. So if I don't want to leave without saying that, you know, going back to what I said at the beginning, he's deeply, deeply flawed person, but you can definitely see the arc. You can see the things he learned during the wilderness years. And yes, he still was a taskmaster. He still was a tough boss, but he had much more respect for people. He was much more willing to stay to the side and not be the one who was in charge all the time. And look at all the great things that came out of that. Oh, no. His opinion of his biological parents was unsparing. I'm not going to. The phrase that he used for them was sort of a description of the biological process, and not very kind. So I'm not going to share it tonight. You can look it up. But he was very hypocritically furious with his birth father for abandoning his birth sister. Like, dude, mirror. Let's look in the mirror. No, he had no relationship with his birth parents. He was insistent that his adoptive parents were his parents, which I really respect. I am an adoptive parent myself, and that touches me that he felt that strongly about his adoptive parents.
You didn't mention Johnny Ivy, but how do you think Apple will fare without him?
Without Jobs?
Without Johnny Ivy.
Without Johnny Ivy. Johnny Ivy is a genius. He is the, he hasn't passed away, has he? I'm going to be embarrassed. He's just, okay. I was afraid I had missed something. Tim Cook and Johnny Ivy are among the, if I may again sort of show you my lessons here, you know, great people and teammates are the key to building a great company. Johnny Ivy was a British colleague of Jobs, who did a lot of the designs that you recognize. And then he had this strong British accent that Jobs used to make fun of. There was one word in particular that he would say that Jobs would always mock him for. But in my personal opinion, I think that Jobs, up until 2011, Tim Cook and Johnny Ivy, up until the present day, have been such effective leaders that the company is no longer all about them. That when they leave, they will have groomed their successors for success. So I have every confidence that Apple will do fine without Ivy. If I knew that, I would be inventing it. No, I mean, actually, I have an opinion on that. I think that for all his bluster and annoying qualities, Zuckerberg might be right about this one. I think that some form of enhanced reality is probably the next big thing. You know, not virtual reality. We're all just in pods living our lives virtually all the time. I don't think that will ever happen. But I do think that some form of display will be invented that we can unobtrusively use walking around, and you can be seeing me and then have bring up a little bio of me or whatever, and or download the live stream of this talk or something like that. Go to see the Louvre and have built in all the information about the art inside, that sort of thing. I think that'll be the big thing. But just a professor at Furman, I'm not the final authority on that for sure. I would be rich, yeah. Well, if I may, just one real quick thing. I still remember in 1992 was my first year at Furman. That's when the web browser Mosaic was invented, and one of the students came down and showed it to me. He said, "I've just installed this in the lab. Come check it out." And I'd been a graduate student since 1985, and we had the internet. It was called ARPANET at the time, but we had the internet, and I knew with as much surety as Steve Jobs would know, ooh, this is changing things. This means everybody has the internet, not just wonks like me who are graduate students in computer science. But if only my next thought had been, I could sell books with this, then I could be Jeff Bezos, and much nicer Jeff Bezos. Yes.
This isn't about Steve Jobs, but what do you think, or do you have an opinion on Chat GPT?
Yeah, I do. There too, a student just kind of showed me recently. He uploaded some. So what it is an artificial intelligence utility that can write really effective documents. You can give it a topic, it can write a paper on it. So it's going to be really heck for us college professors to try to, to catch cheaters and plagiarizers and so on. I mean, literally, it needs to be a new definition of plagiarism. One of my students just recently uploaded some papers of one of our mutual friends and sent me a paper that was written by her, and it was pretty cool. It was, I could see that where I could be fooled by it. Right now, I'm not too worried. As a teacher of writing, I am insistent upon drafts. Multiple versions of something. You can't fake that. You can't get an AI. At least now you can't get an AI to like convincingly do a second draft of a paper that incorporates the comments of the writing teacher. So I think that'll be forestall it for a little while, but it's just going to get more and more powerful. The same thing. The other scary thing is the deep fakes. Is the fake videos and fake pictures that look just perfect. That's a little scary to me. Because I don't know that we can, when that becomes reality, I don't think we can handle it as a society.
One more question. We've gotten off into general technology. So you have to change
One more Steve Jobs question.
There's a question.
Is that why did Jobs pick John Scully? I can't say that I know all the specific details of that. I think Jobs went with his gut. I know he went with his gut a lot. He read about the publicist and said, I got to go get this guy. I think that it probably was more complex than this, but I think basically he knew how to run a company. He had shown he could run a company, and so he went. I concede I don't know much more of the detail.
That's a good stumper question for the guest in June. We thank you for coming.